New Global Patterns by Jinkali Burkett and Joel Champion. Section 1. Japan modernizes. During the 1600s, the Tokugawa shogunate was becoming more and more unpopular with the people. This was due to the fact that the warlord elite held all the land while the merchant class possessed all the wealth, with no political power. Commerce stayed in Japan and they were very isolated from the outside world. Much unrest was seen, so the government responded by returning to the old ways. In July 1853 this all changed, as Commodore Perry sailed right into Tokyo Bay and demanded that the Japanese open up trade. He was able to do this because of his superior firepower. This led to an unequal treaty between the United States and Japan, with many other European nations soon to follow. This led to a stand by the Japanese, in which the shogun was overthrown and the emperor was placed back on the throne. This began the Meiji dynasty. After the emperor was placed back on the throne, the Japanese began a drastic military buildup. This buildup gave them a high demand for resources, which Korea had plenty of. They would have to come in direct contention with Russia and China to acquire these resources. The first test was China, who they swept aside, giving them control of the island of Taiwan. But they still had their eyes on the prize. They then went for complete control of Korea, which brought them face to face with the Russian Navy. The Russian fleet was completely destroyed by the superior Japanese navy. They now had complete control of Korea.
Section 2. Imperialism in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. European merchants gained footholds in Southeast Asia, but most of the area remained independent. This changed in the 1800s. The Dutch, British, and French manipulated local rivalries and used modern armies and technologies to colonize much of Southeast Asia. The King of Siam did not underestimate Western power. He used his knowledge to negotiate with the Western powers and satisfy their goals. In this way, Siam escaped becoming a European colony. Encouraged by American naval officers, Filipino rebel leaders declared independence from Spain. Rebel soldiers threw their support into the fight against Spanish troops. The United States agreed to give Spain $200 million in return for control of the Philippines. In 1878, the United States secured an unequal treaty from Samoa, a group of islands in the South Pacific. The United States gained rights such as extraterritorial and a naval station. Other nations gained similar agreements. When the Hawaiian king tried to reduce foreign influence, American planters overthrew her in 1893. They then asked the United States to annex Hawaii, which it finally did in
Section
1898.
3. Self-rule for Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. In 1763, thousands of French-speaking Catholics were still in Canada. After the American Revolution, about 30,000 British Loyalists fled to Canada. This created a divide. To ease ethnic tensions, Britain passed the Constitutional Act of 1791. This act created two provinces, the English-speaking Upper Canada and French-speaking Lower Canada. The Catholic Church was protected in Lower Canada, while English traditions in the Upper. During the 1800s, unrest grew in both. The people of Upper Canada resented the power held by a small group of elites who controlled the government. Lower Canada had similar problems. In 1837, a rebellion took place. Joseph Panpeau, the head of the French-Canadian Party Reform, led the rebellion in Lower Canada. William Lyon Mackenzie led the revolt in Upper Canada. The British had learned from the American Revolution. They hurried to put down the disorder and sent an able politician, Lord Durham, to compile a report of the causes of unrest. In 1840, Parliament acted on some of Durham's recommendations by passing the Act of Union. This created the Dominion of Canada. The Dutch were the first Europeans to reach Australia, but the first settlers had reached Australia perhaps 40,000 years earlier, probably from Southeast Asia, and spread across the continent. The indigenous or original people were called Aborigines. The Aborigines lived in small, hunting and food-gathering bands. Aboriginal groups spoke as many as 250 distinct languages. Britain made Australia into a penal colony, or a place where convicted criminals are sent to be punished. The first British ships, carrying about 700 convicts, arrived in Botany Bay, Australia in 1788. In the early 1800s, Britain encouraged free citizens to emigrate to Australia by offering them land and tools. And then in 1851, a gold rush in eastern Australia brought a population boom. Many gold hunters stayed on to become ranchers and farmers. They pushed into the rugged interior known as the outback. As newcomers settled in, they thrust aside or killed Aborigines. In 1901, British helped the colonies unite into the independent Commonwealth of Australia. The new country kept its ties to Britain by recognizing the British monarch as head of state. The Australian Constitution drew on both British and American models. In 1769, New Zealand was claimed by Britain. Missionaries landed there in 1814 to convert the indigenous people, the Maori, to Christianity. The Maori were descended from a seafaring people who had reached New Zealand from Polynesia in the 1200s. White settlers who were attracted by New Zealand's mild climate and good soil followed the missionaries. These settlers introduced sheep and cattle and were soon exporting wool, mutton, and beef. In 1840, Britain annexed New Zealand. As colonists poured in, they took over more and more of the land, leading to fierce wars with the Maori. Many Maori died in the struggle. Still more perished from disease, alcoholism, and other misfortunes that followed the European colonization. By the 1870s, resistance crumbled. The Maori population had fallen drastically from about 200,000 to less than 45,000 in 1896. Like settlers in Australia and Canada, white New Zealanders sought self-rule. In 1907, they won independence with their own parliament, prime minister, and elected legislature. They, too, preserved close ties to the British Empire.
Section 4: Economic Imperialism in Latin America. The new constitution guaranteed equality before the law, but deep-rooted inequalities remained. Voting rights were limited. Many people felt the effects of racial prejudice. Small groups of people held most of the land. Owners of haciendas ruled the great estates, and the peasants who worked them like medieval European lords. In 1855, Benito Juarez opened an era of reform known as La Reforma. Juarez offered hope to the oppressed people of Mexico. He and his fellow reformers revised the Mexican Constitution to strip the military of power and end the special privileges of the church. They ordered the church to sell unused lands to peasants. Strict laws kept colonists from trading with other countries and possibly obtaining goods at a lower price. In addition, laws prohibited the building of local industries that would have competed with the parent country. In short, the policies prevented the colonies from developing their own economies. After independence, this pattern changed very little. The new Latin American republics did not adopt free trade, welcoming all comers. Britain and the United States rushed into the new markets, replacing Spain as Latin America's chief trading partners, but the region remained as economically dependent as before. As a result of the war with Mexico in 1848, the United States acquired the thinly populated regions of northern Mexico, gaining all or part of present-day states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. American investments in Latin America grew in the early 1900s. Citing the need to protect those investments, in 1904, the United States issued the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Under this policy, the United States claimed international police power in the Western Hemisphere. The Panama Canal opened in 1914. The canal cut the distance of a sea journey between such cities as New York and San Francisco by thousands of miles. It was an engineering marvel that boosted trade and shipping worldwide.